Little boy ran to Hell's Angels crying, "They're beating my dad." What the bikers did is shocking before we start this ride. Tell us where in the world you're watching from. And if stories of courage, loyalty, and redemption move you, tap subscribe on Bikershype so you never miss the next ride. The afternoon sun bled over the Nevada desert highway, turning the asphalt into molten glass. Wind pushed heat across the basin in rippling sheets, and the world shimmered like a mirage that hadn't made up its mind. The Iron Vultures motorcycle club had stopped near an old service station with a leaning sign and a Pepsi machine that hadn't worked since anyone could remember. 10 bikes idled in a loose crescent, chrome catching the dying light like knives laid out on velvet. Diesel and laughter filled the air. Someone told a joke. Someone else coughed smoke toward the sky. A radio crackled inside the office with the low murmur of a baseball game 2 states over. Then came the scream. Not the quick yelp of surprise, but the raw-edged sound of something breaking that should never break. Every head turned. Silence fell so hard, it felt like the air knew to get out of the way. A boy no older than 8 burst from behind the rusted pumps, sand shooting from under his sneakers. He stumbled, then caught himself, breath ragged, voice roughed by dust and tears. "Please, they're—" He swallowed a sob that sounded too big for his bones. "They're beating my dad." The words landed like thrown wrenches. Engines rumbled into quiet. 10 men wore the same look. A muscle jumping in the jaw, eyes narrowing on a horizon that had just changed. The boy's face was streaked with grit, his hair stuck to his forehead, his small hands trembling as he pointed across the road to the row of run-down motel rooms. The place sat sun-bleached and mean, doors hanging crooked. A neon vacancy sign trying and failing to convince the evening it still had something to offer. For a moment, no one moved. Then one man stepped forward, broad-shouldered, grizzled beard, tattoos fading under sunburnt skin. He pulled off his helmet slowly, the gesture neat, like he was clocking in. Eyes the color of a thunderhead met the boy's and softened just enough to be seen. "Where?" he asked. The kid pointed again, hand shaking. "End unit." They said he owed. Words nodded. Fear did the rest. The man nodded once. "Name's Jax," he said, and in the way he said it, the boy stopped shaking quite so much. "What's yours?" "Eli." "Okay, Eli." Jack set his helmet on the seat of his Harley, the patched leather of his cut whispering when he moved. Road Captain curved over the club rocker. Across his shoulders, Iron Vultures. Beneath the eagle's claws, ride hard, stand tall. He swung a leg over. "Mount up," he growled to the men without raising his voice. We ride. 10 bikes answered as one, a thunder roll that shook dust from the roadside signs. Jax edged forward, and the boy climbed up behind him like he'd known how all his life, arms tight around a man built like a wall with a heartbeat. Across the highway they tore, hot air, hot steel, hot purpose, toward the motel where the air smelled like old beer and the echo of slammed doors. As they rolled in, Jax saw 2 men outside a doorway, their shirts sticking to bellies that had known too much cheap liquor and not enough daylight. One was yelling, the other swinging a belt with the lazy cruelty of someone who'd practiced. From inside, the kind of crying you feel in your teeth. That's them. Eli's voice cracked on the word, a small siren. Jax raised a hand. The line fanned out and stopped with a soft choreography that had nothing to do with dance and everything to do with promise. Boots hit ground. Helmets came off. The sudden quiet was a cut-glass thing. "Hey!" Jax's voice hit the air like a hammer. The men turned, sunburnt, mean-eyed, drunk. "Ain't your business," the belt man slurred, lifting the strip of leather again. "Kid made it mine," Jax said. The drunk swung first, wild and wide. Jax stepped inside the arc, caught the wrist, turned it down and in, and introduced the man's forehead to the stucco hard enough to shake loose a powder of old paint. The belt clattered to concrete. The second man lunged, and Reaper, tall, tattooed to the scalp, hands like spades, met him with a forearm that put him on his back and took the air like a secret you don't get to keep. Inside, the room smelled like fear and cleaner. Eli's father lay bleeding on the cheap carpet, nose broken, shirt torn. A woman knelt beside him, one hand on his shoulder, the other covering her mouth like she could hold the cry in if she just pressed hard enough. Jax crouched and got his shoulder under the man, eased him to sit. "Who are they?" he asked. The woman stammered. Landlords. He's late. Rent, the man breathed, flinching as his ribs remembered. Jax's jaw ticked. He stood, looked to Reaper, who had the belt man by the collar now and was reconsidering his life for him. Call it even, Jax said. You don't touch this family again. You don't tell me. The man started and ended on a pop of sound that was Reaper's knuckles finishing the sentence. The quiet after wasn't peaceful. It was careful. Sirens rose from the highway, the high whine of something official drawing a line across the sand. The Iron Vultures didn't run. They never ran. They stood where they were, a wall of leather and steel that didn't blink under the redness that passed for evening. When the cruisers slid up, the officers took in the scene the way men do who have seen a lot and almost enough. 10 bikers, motionless, palms open. 2 thugs half collapsed. A trembling family in a doorframe carved out of cheap wood and cheaper promises. Jax raised his hands to chest height, the quiet leader in a photograph no one had planned to take. They were beating him when we got here, he said. Every eye moved to the woman. She nodded, voice small but steady. They saved us. Cuffs clicked. Paperwork began. The desert wind lifted heat from the road. Eli's father, Mark, blinked blood from his lashes and looked at Jax like math that didn't add up. You didn't have to, he said, breath whistling around swelling. Yeah, Jax said, like a man making change. I did. Night poured down slow. Engines cooled. Cigarettes burned like pinpricks in the dark. Mark sat on the steps with his arm around Eli and the kind of tired that starts behind your eyes and works out. I don't know how to thank you, he murmured. You already did, Jax said, glancing at the boy whose lashes were clumped with dust. You raised a kid who ran toward help, not away. That ain't nothing. Doc, the treasurer, who smelled like motor oil and tobacco and always had an envelope put aside for something he couldn't name until it knocked, set a thick rectangle in Mark's hand. Don't argue, he said, and Mark was about to until he saw Jax's look, the one that said the discussion was already over and it ended the right way. Eli tugged at Jax's vest. You're not bad guys, he said, half question, half verdict. Nah, Jax said, rough mouth easing into the shape of a smile. We just look that way. By morning, the town had a new story. A headline that couldn't tell patches apart called them Hell's Angels, and to most people, chrome is chrome. In the sheriff's office, Wayne Porter dropped the paper on his desk like it might stain the wood. Jack's rock, he muttered. Trouble dressed like a good deed. A deputy leaned in the doorway, picking something from a molar with a thumbnail. People are saying those bikers are heroes, he said. Porter's mouth moved like a man biting back a history. He doesn't play savior without reason, he said. And the deputy didn't ask what reason it might be because some doors are heavy and some names are locks. Across town, Jax parked his Harley outside a rundown repair garage where the sign said Benson Auto in letters that had seen better paint. Inside, Mark worked under a hood, one eye swollen, the other blue, both open. I owe you more than... Fix my clutch when I need it, Jax said. He was already turning to go when something on the wall caught his eye, a framed photo in sun-faded glass. 3 men in uniform, arms around each other. The middle one, Mark, the one on the right with a square jaw and a stare like a plumb line. Porter, younger by a lifetime. Jax stood very still. He breathed very slow. The day took on angles. That night the Iron Vultures circled a bonfire behind the clubhouse, a converted grain depot that smelled like pines soaked in gasoline and old laughter. Sparks lifted into a sky freckled with stars. Reaper leaned forward, elbows on knees. You saw it, he said, the words not a question. Yeah, Jax said. Explains the sniffing, Doc murmured. Smoke curling from his lip like a thought. Explain something, Jax said. But his eyes were on the fire where the flames licked a rhythm he couldn't name. From the other side of the lot, a high laugh drifted, a child's, pure and bell-clear. Eli was playing catch with Tiny, the mechanic built like a bear that had decided people weren't so bad if they brought him sandwiches. Eli's throw wobbled. Tiny made a show of falling over to catch it, and the world, for a breath, held steady. Jax muttered it like a vow. We protect our own, he said, even when we don't know why. Sheriff Porter arrived at sunup, dust on his boots and a look in his eyes Jax knew from mirrors at midnight. The bikers paused their work and watched from the shadows of their own grease-slicked doors. Jax came out wiping his hands on a rag. Morning, Sheriff, he said. "Morning, Rock," Porter said, eyes skimming over metal and men like he was making a list of things he'd seize if he ever got the chance. "You planning to explain why you played hero last night?" "Didn't know helping a kid needed a permit," Jack said, deadpan. Porter's jaw flexed. "That man you helped, Mark Benson, know who he really is?" Jax tilted his head. "A father." Porter lowered his voice until it sat in the space where threat and warning shake hands. "He was my sergeant. Went missing 5 years ago after a weapons deal overseas went sideways." Porter's eyes didn't blink. "We found bodies, not him. Someone covered it up. You saying he's dirty?" "I'm saying he's not who that boy thinks he is," Porter said, the brim of his hat cutting a line across his face. He turned to leave. "Be careful who you save. Rock. Some ghosts don't need resurrecting." He left tire dust in the yard and silence in his wake. When night came, it brought restless wind that pushed at the edges of the desert, like a child testing a fence. Jack sat on a milk crate by his bike, rolling a cigarette he never lit, the paper crinkling under fingers that had done more damage and more good than they could reconcile. Doc stepped out of the shadows, quiet as always. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" Doc asked. "That maybe we didn't stop a beating," Jack said. "Maybe we interrupted a debt." Doc nodded once. "You going to dig?" "I always do." The road to the motel wore moonlight like armor. The place looked smaller at night, as if darkness had taken a bite out of it. Jax found the door to Mark's unit ajar by a finger's width. Inside, lamp dark, bed stripped, the ghost of movement in the air. No Mark, no Eli, no nothing. Nothing except a torn patch from the corner of a duffel bag caught on a nail. It was military, the insignia scuffed but still proud. Jax tucked it into his vest pocket, and the unease he'd been nursing stood up inside him. "What did you drag us into, soldier?" he asked the Quiet. Quiet didn't answer. Morning saw the clubhouse wake like a machine coming online. The patch hit the table with a slap that pulled every eye. "Mark's gone," Jax said. "Packed up in the dark. You think he ran?" Reaper asked, the word shaped like a thing you spit. "He's hiding," Jax said. "Or being hunted." Doc unfolded a county map that had lived stapled to the wall since before some of the men had grown beards. He traced a finger north. "Old military depot," he said, tapping a remote stretch of canyon road. "Been abandoned longer than we've had knees." "If he's ex-service and scared, he knows it," Jax finished. And the bikes were already hungry. They rode as the sun climbed, chrome throwing bright knives around them, dust lifting behind like the tail of a comet that had decided to go slow. The basin gave way to broken rock. The air cooled as if cliffs could cast shade on heat itself. The depot appeared the way secrets do, all at once and as if it had always been there, chain-link fence rusted to lace, bunkers half-buried like giants that had lain down to sleep and forgotten to wake, silence thick enough that noise would have to fight to get through. Jax cut his engine first. Hands raised, the line halted like a single animal listening. He scanned the ground, bent, touched dust, rose. "2 sets," he murmured. "One big, one small." "Eli," Reaper said, like a prayer you don't admit to. They moved to a bunker with a door left a hand's width open. Inside, a lantern set the walls trembling with light. Mark sat against concrete gouged by time, a pistol across his lap like a truth he hated to hold. Eli slept against his side, a thin arm thrown around a stuffed bear that had been hugged into a different color. "You shouldn't have come," Mark said without looking up. "Kid's scared," Jax replied. "So am I. Tell me what's real before other people bleed." Mark's eyes were red-rimmed, the kind a man gets not from tears but from grit and the failure of sleep. He stared at nothing for a count of heartbeats that hurt to watch. "We ran weapons," he said finally. "Contractor work that never smelled right. Paper said one thing, hands took them somewhere else. When I found out those crates were headed to cartels and not the boys we were supposed to be backing, I made noise." He laughed then, a sound with no mirth in it. "They called it treason. Porter was my CO. He buried it because someone above him told him to. Bodies fell. I ran. They never stopped looking." He nodded toward Eli without meeting Jax's eyes. "And now they don't send letters. They send men." Outside, a small wind moved grit across stone like a whisper. Jax leaned a shoulder to the wall and closed his eyes long enough to see a younger man in a different war making a different mistake. "You ran to keep him from being a message," he said softly. Mark swallowed. "Yes," Jax opened his eyes. The lantern flame jinked. throwing tiny shadows across his face. "Then we finish the message," he said. "We send our own." They prepped as men do who know the weight of choices. Doc took Eli deeper into the bunker, told a gentle lie about a game, and set him behind tools that would feel like toys in small hands. Reaper counted ammo he hoped not to use. Jax checked exits and angles and found in his chest a calm that wasn't peace but a cousin of it. Engines sounded before dawn. Not bikes. Not trucks, but SUVs, 3 of them, their headlamps flicking across the ridgeline like nervous eyes. They came slow, doors opening on men whose gear matched, tan and black and the kind of quiet that isn't shy. Contractors? Reaper murmured behind his teeth. "Maybe," Jax said, taking the notch of a crumbled parapet and becoming part of rock. They moved with military economy, sweeping, signaling, fanning around the bunker like a pour of oil. The first man to see Reaper saw him from too close. Reaper's fist reached him before his mouth could shape a sound, and the canyon swallowed the thud. Then the next, and the next, motion devolving into chaos with purpose. Gunfire came, not a lot, but enough to write it down in the stone. Jax moved like a man whose body had learned the angles of trouble long ago. He took a knee, let a baton pass overhead, swept a leg, dropped a shoulder, took a jaw, felt it give and didn't think of it again. A taser spat and found concrete. The air smelled of ozone and fear. It was fast because good fights are. When the smoke lifted, 2 SUVs burned low and mean, heat curling the paint off their hoods, heat throwing orange up the canyon walls as if sunrise had come early to see what the fuss was about. Men lay groaning, wrists cinched with zip ties that had lived under Doc's seat for years, waiting to be useful. Mark knelt beside one and pulled a badge from his vest. "Not private, federal issue, cold and correct." "They're not contractors," he said, voice very even now that it had something hard to stand on. "They're feds." Jax's mouth became a line. "Porter sent them," he said. Mark nodded. "He thinks I'm a loose end." Choices arrived in a row like bottles on a rail. Jax looked at Eli sleeping against a wall down the corridor, the boy's lips moving with a dream that didn't know it was in a bunker. He looked at the men around him, at the smoke floating up to tell the morning some other story than the one it had planned to have. "What now, boss?" Reaper asked. "We finish what he started," Jax said, and the decision was a key in the clubhouse door they all carried in their chests. He turned to Mark. "You ready to face him?" Mark touched Eli's hair with a hand that trembled. "Not for me," he said. "For him," Jax nodded once. "Then saddle up." They hit the highway in a line that looked like a thought made of steel. The town gathered itself around the sound, curtains shifting, phones lifting, someone clutching a robe tighter because trouble and salvation both make the same noise when they come on 2 wheels. 10 bikes cut the morning open. Mark rode behind Jax with Eli small and stubborn in front of him, tiny fingers gripping the tank like he could hold on to something bigger than gas and paint. Ahead, the sheriff's office, brick and glass and old authority with a new crack in it. "No one draws unless they do," Jax said into the comm, voice steady. "We're not here to fight. We're here to finish." They parked as one. Engines died. The echo took its time leaving. Sheriff Wayne Porter stood on the steps with his hat low and his hand near his holster like a man who had rehearsed this moment in a mirror. His eyes found Jax and stayed there. For a heartbeat, something else crossed his face, something tired and human, and then it was gone. "You should have stayed gone," he said. "You should have stayed honest," Jax said, stepping forward. The town held its breath. Eli's voice came small but clear because children don't know how to aim truth except straight. "Please don't hurt my dad again." And the thing about innocence is that it changes the room. Every gun lowered a fraction because something in the air had shifted its weight to the other foot. Inside, the office smelled like coffee turned, old paper, the kind of cleaner you buy in drums. The Iron Vultures stood shoulder to shoulder but back a step, leaving space on either side of Jax like a man has when his shadow needs room to move. Porter's hand hovered close to the gun the way a storm hovers over a town that knows the sound. "You think you can intimidate me?" Porter asked. "I think you can read," Jax said. He laid a folded document on the desk, edges torn, pages thin from a man's hands going over them in the dark. "Mark's report. The one you buried." He kept a copy. Porter stared. The deputy behind him swallowed, Adam's apple moving like something caught in a river. Porter opened the first page, eyes scanning contract numbers and signatures and names that tasted like metal. "You have no idea what you're stepping into," he said, but the tremor in his voice made a liar of the words. "We're stepping where decent men stopped," Jack said. Mark came forward. His face held nothing but the truth and a year of nights in it. "You framed me, Wayne," he said, the name like a bridge burned on purpose. "You let them ship death and called it paperwork." Porter's jaw tightened. For a second, grief ghosted across his features. Grief for the version of himself that might have done something else. "You think the government cares about your conscience?" he whispered. "Maybe not," Jack said, tapping the desk once. "The people outside do." Outside, the crowd had clothed their curiosity and purpose. Phones were up. The town had 1,000 eyes, and for once they were all looking at the same thing. The shot came sudden and ugly, a reflex. A last grab at the power to make a decision stick. Porter's pistol cracked, the sound too loud in the small room. The bullet grazed Jax's arm because he had moved without thinking, his body making a choice his mouth hadn't caught up to, putting himself between the gun and the man who had brought him a child's cry. The bikers surged forward, but Jax barked, "No!" and the words stopped them like a hand on the chest. He stood, blood-soaking leather, and the floor getting a drop it hadn't asked for. "It's over, Wayne," he said, and this time it was. The deputies didn't look at Porter like a boss anymore. They looked at him like a man who had crossed a line and made them his witnesses. One of them, young, with a face that still fit him, took the gun from Porter's hand and said quietly, almost kindly, "It's done." They led the sheriff out past a crowd that did not jeer because sometimes justice doesn't want noise. He muttered about orders and cover-ups and chains of command, but no one needed to hear it to know it. The world was changing by increments you could almost see. Mark pressed a rag to Jax's arm in a parking lot that had seen 100 fender benders and never this. "You didn't have to take that bullet," he said. Jax grinned, a thin slice of humor cut from the hard loaf of the day. "Wasn't my first," he said. "Probably not my last." Eli stood watching with eyes wide and a bear clutched in a fist. "You saved him again," he whispered, small and reverent. "That's what we do," Jax said, resting a rough hand on the boy's head. "Ride for what's right." Days turned to headlines. News vans rolled in like bright beetles, feeding wires and taking statements. Sheriff arrested in federal probe. Corruption alleged in weapons scandal. The Iron Vultures didn't give interviews. They rode out of frames the way they rode into them, uninvited and unforgettable. At the edge of town, a workshop that smelled like grease and second chances hummed with life. Mark and Eli rebuilt a battered Harley together, the boy asking questions until the evening ran out of answers. Above the pegboard hung Jax's old jacket for a time, patched and torn and signed in black ink, for the kid who ran toward the roar. Every Sunday, engines rolled like thunder down the canyon road. The club never stopped. They honked twice, once for the father who stood up, once for the child who believed. Eli would drop a wrench and sprint outside, waving like a flag of truce, and 10 hands would lift, and the world would be simple for as long as it takes a bike to pass a small shop in a small town. A month later, the clubhouse wore a new mural on the cinder block wall, a child's drawing. Scaled up and sealed, 10 bikes like dragonflies. A small boy with arms lifted, a man kneeling to look him in the eye. Over it, Doc had lettered 5 words steady as his soul. Not devils, just guardians in leather. Visitors stopped sometimes. They read the words. Some nodded like they'd always known. Some stood quiet and let something hot slip from their eyes. Stories started in bars as jokes and ended as prayers. The town learned to hold 2 truths at once, that patches can mean danger and that sometimes the men wearing them will be the ones who show up when it matters. Weeks turned to months. The Iron Vultures kept their distance the way owls do, present but unseen. They were there when a house fire licked at the edges of a trailer park, there when a battered woman needed a ride out of a bad night, there when a kid stood on a sidewalk and watched his father try to be better. One evening, gold broke across the ridge and Jax rode alone to the old service station where it had begun. The sign still leaned. The Pepsi machine still remembered quarters like a lost language. He cut the engine and listened to heat tick itself away. A small figure rolled down the road, petals flashing, hair wild. Eli stopped, breathless. "My dad says thank you," he said. Jax reached into his pocket and came out with a keychain. Small metal wings, worn to a soft shine by thumb and time. "Give him this," he said. Tell him we all ride for something. What do you ride for? Eli asked child straight. Jax looked at a line where the sky met the earth and didn't fight him anymore. For the ones no one else will, he said. A year later, the mural faded just enough to look like it had always been there. People who drove past Lone Ridge rolled down windows on purpose. Some swore they could hear a deeper note under the wind, the sound of an oath kept, the hum of a promise still running. Sometimes, when the rumble of engines rose in the valley and the sun laid a hand of orange light across the desert, Eli would look up from a carburetor or homework and say, "They're watching." And somewhere beyond the line where heat blurs the world, Jack's rock would lean into a curve and let the road write another story under his wheels. If this story made you feel something, if it reminded you that courage still roams the open road, hit like, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to Bikershype. Because out there, between leather and steel, live the hearts that refuse to turn away.